the shores of old Lake Erie stands our alma mater true. Fredonia state we proudly honor, with its colors white and blue.
Hi, everybody. I am Jack Croxton, and welcome to our podcast, Reflections of Fredonia. Let me tell you just a little bit about myself. I am a retired professor of psychology, and in my retirement, I thought, what would be some interesting things I might like to do? And it occurred to me that it would be fun to interview alumni from Fredonia. I came here in 1979 and just spent a wonderful career here working with students, and I thought, well, let's talk to some of these students who are now graduates and have gone on to interesting careers. And I ended up talking to Chloe, who will introduce herself shortly, and we've put together this podcast. It is being run at the Fredonia Radio Systems, Fredonia student-run radio station.
Hi everyone, my name is Chloe. I graduated from Fredonia in May 2024, and while I was a student here, I was a double major in communications, journalism, and psychology, and I had minors in English and political science.
For today's podcast, we have a very special guest. Somehow I have a feeling that this podcast may eventually just go to the dogs, but we will see. We'll see how it turns out. So our guest is Gina Lattuca. Could you introduce yourself? Tell us what year you graduated from Fredonia.
Sure. I graduated from wonderful Fredonia in 1988 and started in radio at WBEN and Rock 102.5 at the time. And in 1990, I started as the public relations director at the SPCA serving Erie County, where almost 35 years later, I still work as chief communications officer.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So what did you study while you were a student here at Fredonia?
When I came, I actually came to Fredonia the summer before my senior year in high school for piano camp and for music camp. At that time, I was all about majoring in music, majoring in piano, and came here as a music major at first. And after that first semester, really took a long, hard look at things, realized as much as I love playing piano, is that a career that I want to pursue? And realized it wasn't, and so I was floundering for a bit. Once I dropped that major, I accompanied some of the voice majors, but thankfully for Fredonia, they helped me sort it all out, and I ended up as an English major with a concentration in public relations and journalism, which at the time fell under the English major, and my minor was human communications.
That's super cool. I had a similar experience. I came in as an English major, and I switched over to journalism.
Mm-hmm.
So that's super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and journalism is no longer within English, right?
Right. It's
changed.
under the communications department.
Yeah.
And then there's the two tracks, so you could do print journalism, so like magazines, newspapers, stuff like that, or you can do broadcast journalism, so TV, radio, stuff like that as well. So super cool.
Yeah, fascinating to see how things change.
Yeah, absolutely. We do still have a few classes that are journalism that are in the English department. So Dr. McVicker teaches a opinion and journalism class.
Okay.
And it's under the English department.
Okay.
But English also recently had a little bit of a split where they also now have a writing major that's in its own separate thing from English.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so it's kind of all over the place because we have the journalism people, the English people, and the writing people who are all kind of under the same umbrella but are all in separate departments.
Mm-hmm.
But they tend to overlap a lot.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So was it that piano camp that kind of made you come to Fredonia, or how did Fredonia get on your radar?
Absolutely, 100%. Once Fredonia was on my radar, the camp was 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it here. And of course, my parents made me apply, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, yep.
Made me apply to Ithaca and a couple other schools. But Fredonia was really, if I had my way, Fredonia would have been the one and only.
Aw.
Probably smart to go through the application process at other schools. But thankfully, Fredonia accepted me. And interestingly enough, It was the year that Fredonia became the School of Music rather than the Department of Music.
Oh, okay.
So that December, I had my audition already, and my audition was the end of January. And around the holiday season, we received letters saying that now the Department of Music was going to be the School of Music, which changed almost everything about my audition. And I had about a month and a half to learn almost an entirely new audition.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it was a very, very stressful, but it still didn't change my mind. This was where I wanted to be.
Aw.
Yeah.
That's great. So looking back, do you have any favorite memories or experiences from your time as a student here? Any maybe professors stand out? Or?
It would take me about 4 years to tell you all of my 4 years of memory. I could talk about the singular experiences, which of course are the professors and the classes and my friends and the experiences, or even the more universal that Fredonia offered, which were the experiences that they offered, that it was up to me to take advantage of. But I have to say, I think one of my favorite things about this school, which is something that I thought almost every higher education institution would offer, is the ability to make choices, to receive assistance from these professors and from advisors and from people at admissions and from career development. They presented to me what Fredonia had to offer and what was possible. But somehow they struck that delicate balance of knowing when to then step back and letting me make the choices and letting me work for what I wanted. And it's a very delicate balance. When somebody does too much of the work for you, do you value it as much as if you had done all of the work yourself? And again, it's something that I took for granted. I thought every educational institution would offer that sort of culture. And now, almost 40 years later, as I talk to people and their experiences at school, and as I help my nieces and nephews sort things out with looking at their higher education choices, it's not the case. It was the case at Fredonia, and I realized how exceptional that was. So I guess that has to be one of my favorite memories, the fact that I was given guidance, and then I was also given the freedom to make my own choice.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, it sounds like you certainly made the most of your experiences while you were attending Fredonia.
I feel like I still am. I was telling my husband as we were driving here from Buffalo, I said, I cannot believe, again, almost 40 years later, how often I go back to something that Dr. Warner had told me at the time, or Dr. Klein in communications, who we sadly lost while I was a student here, and it was one of the saddest things I experienced. Dr. Samula, Dr. Deming, just these professors who I so often go back to their words. And I so often go back to them saying, Dr. Deming in particular with this, think critically. It doesn't mean cynically, but think critically. Don't automatically follow what someone's telling you the way they're telling you. Watch how they're telling you. Watch what's in the background. Watch what they're doing. And I can't believe how often I go back to those words. I can't believe how often I go back to an experience with Dr. Warner. One of my first classes with him, I believe, was freshman year. And I turned in a paper, and I thought I aced that paper. I was very excited over it. And he returned the papers the following week, and I remember flipping through, and it was red lines everywhere. Everywhere. And I thought, and his words and writing, and I thought, I don't even want to get back to the last page of this paper because I must have failed. There's no way. And I had an A. Well, now that wasn't sitting well with me either, because I thought, well, wait a minute, he redlined everything. Why do I have an A? And I remember going to his office after the class, and he said, first of all, you're the first student to ever come and complain to me about an A. But second of all, you proved your point. I don't agree with you. This is what I think about the topics you brought up, but you proved why you think it. What you think is just as important as what I think. And that's helped me tremendously, too. I go back to that quite often because, especially in animal welfare, the field is so changing as every other field. And I sit and I think, okay, I want to take the extraordinary experiences I had at the SPCA, what we learned 30 years ago. So much of it is still relevant, even in the face of the new information. What I think in that experience is still valuable. And I go back to what Dr. Warner said, what you think is just as valuable is what I think. Don't ever sell yourself short.
Sure. I have a funny anecdote I've got to throw in about Dr. Deming. He was on a bowling team with me when the bowling alley was in the basement of Dodds Hall
Yes.
on campus.
I didn't know he was on a team.
And he was like a mediocre bowler. But one game, he got like 8 strikes in a row. And we were just amazed.
Wow.
How did he possibly
His
do that?
moment.
Because his average was maybe like 110.
Yeah. It's better than my average. So.
And then after those,
Mine too.
and then after those 8 strikes, I think he threw a few gutter balls, and he ended up with not the greatest score. But for that
8 strikes is
incredible
crazy.
moment, he
Yeah.
threw 8 strikes in a row.
See, well, what he lacked in bowling talent, he more than made up for in communications.
That's right.
Right? Yes, one of my favorite teachers taught me
Yeah.
so much.
Hmm.
Awesome. You also mentioned before we went on the podcast that you worked here at FRS. Tell me about that. I want to hear about it.
Oh, yes, I did. Well, I have to actually jump ahead to say when I first left here, I was very well trained with radio and started working at WBEN, again, Rock 102. And the person who trained me there is someone still well known in Buffalo broadcasting, Randy Bushover. Interestingly enough, here at Fredonia, his brother Ryan Bushover is who trained me here at this radio station. And so the Bushover boys trained me at both radio stations where I worked. But yeah, very, very well trained. Now, again, we're talking about the 80s. So we're talking about cassette tapes and carts and albums. And I remember when I first started working, I also did some work at WBLK. And I remember those 3 radio stations. It would take me maybe half a day to splice a cart if there was a mistake in a commercial. Now it's a switch of a button. I can't even
Yeah.
imagine how fast it is to correct something. It's incredible to see the difference now compared to the 80s.
Absolutely. So jumping ahead a little bit more. So we learned, I think your official title, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is Chief Communications Officer?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yep, at the SPCA in West Seneca.
Yeah.
And you told us you've been there for over 30 years,
Yes.
which is incredible. So tell us a little bit about what you do.
A little bit of everything. Again, when I started there in 1990, I was employee number 32. There were 32 of us. So we were all kind of pitching in, helping to clean kennels, going on cruelty case. Not so much the investigations, but once it turns out that maybe there is a hoarder with 50 cats, so many of us were expected to go down there and help get those cats out and help in the infirmary doing some not so pleasant things. And now there are about 130 of us. So it's a little bit different. But boy, that experience, now we can relate. I can relate to people who are right now our fantastic animal care staff cleaning a kennel, what they're going through, what they're experiencing. I can relate to that because I can't tell you the number of kennels I cleaned, or, you have to be ready to do a little bit of everything. With my daily job, a lot of it is really ensuring that the SPCA serving Erie County is positioned where we needed to be positioned in our community as far as emotion and affection of the public. We are 100% donor supported. We don't receive tax dollars. We're not part of a larger group like the ASPCA. We're completely independent. And because we are funded only by donations, even though not every story is happy, even though not every outcome is happy, I have to do my best with our communications team and the rest of the staff. They're all in PR. Every staff member is in public relations. But we have to do our best to ensure that that truth comes out. The difficult positions that we're in, the stories that don't always end happy, we have to ensure that the community understands enough so that they are still supporting us. They are still making sure that the work that we're doing can continue. The day that I pulled up in 1990 for my interview, I pulled up through a picket line, and I remember I got there very early. We were in Tonawanda, New York at the time, and I remember driving past the picket line and pulling into a hot dog stand next to the SPCA and calling my dad and saying, "Dad, I don't know what to do. My interview is today, but there are people picketing the SPCA. Should I not go?" And I remember my dad on the phone saying, "You turn around, you pull in, and you walk in there, and you tell them why, if you're there, the SPCA won't be picketed again." And it was a unique opportunity. My dad was exactly right because here we are. I mean, God put me in the right place almost 35 years later. I'm still there, and we haven't been picketed again. So it worked. Look at that.
Wow.
Look at how
Good.
Fredonia prepared me.
That's a good story.
Aw.
Actually, I'm a volunteer at the Lakeshore Humane Society
Oh, yes.
locally.
Yeah,
And
we
so
work
I
with
go in
them.
I go in once a week, and Mary, my wife, says, "Don't you dare bring one of those dogs back home with you."
I volunteered
'Cause
there
I-
before too. Yeah.
Because I get to love those dogs. And I
Of
just want them to
course.
find a happy home.
Tell Mary it's foster. It's just temporary, Mary. Just temporary. Wink.
Well, we have our hands full as it is because we have our dog. My daughter works locally. She has a dog, so we have to watch that dog during the day. My son has a dog. We watch that dog during the day.
Oh, your
So
hands
we're
are
already
full.
doing considerable
Yeah.
dog sitting.
You're your own humane society right
Yeah.
there.
Exactly. Oh, so what would you say is the favorite part of your job?
I oh my gosh! Again, I would need another 4 years to answer that. I have to think about that for a minute. My favorite part of my job, I want to say working with the animals because, of course, that's just
Yeah.
one wonderful perk. But I have to say, watching the evolution of the field has been incredibly exciting, not just the communications field and how to now communicate messaging. You know, when I started there, again, it was 1990. There were no computers. I started with a typewriter that didn't even have a white correction button on it. I had to actually use liquid paper just to give an idea of how long ago it was. So watching the evolution of the field of communications and two-way communication with the advent of social media and the internet has been incredibly exciting, but also watching the field of animal welfare progress has been so amazing to watch. There are certain elements that have stayed the same that we're just learning more about. For instance, learning more about violence toward human beings and violence toward animals and that connection and what causes it and what leads to it. If you've had a violent past, does that necessarily mean you will be violent to animals and then to people? And learning more about that has been incredible to watch. It's been very interesting for me to go in with, now when I look back, my small-mindedness about things and have my mind expanded. That has been incredible, again, for the field of communications and the field of animal welfare. I go in thinking, well, of course, if you had a violent past, of course you're going to abuse animals. And learning how wrong I was, that's been fascinating. It's been fascinating to have my mind expanded like that. When social media first started and the internet, I have to admit, it was terrifying at first because up until then, I was telling the story about the SPCA that I wanted told, and I would talk to the news stations the way that I wanted to talk to them. And the way that people complained or disagreed wasn't through an email. It was through maybe a phone call. Maybe somebody would write a letter. But who sees that? Just me, just my boss, and we're responding to those people. But they didn't have the power to affect collective thinking the way people now do with social media. My husband and I were talking on the way here about active listening and about effective communication, how 50% of effective communication, only 50, is the message giver's responsibility. The other 50% is the message receiver's responsibility. And if there are people willing to not critically think the way Dr. Deming taught, the way Dr. Klein taught, if there are people willing to just go along with the status quo, with that large societal thinking and not ask questions, how dangerous is that? And now in social media, it's even more dangerous because one post, one TikTok video, one Instagram, all of a sudden, 5,000 comments, we blink our eyes. I have a very small communications team. It's me and two other workers. We blink our eyes, and all weekend, we're sitting in front of a computer trying to respond to people to make them understand. Don't just agree with it. You have to ask questions. You have to think. So I would have to say, to go all the way back to your question, one of my favorite things is having my mind expanded and learning these new challenges. I think that's why I've been able to stay in this position so long. The challenges are constantly new. It does not get boring.
That sounds
That's
great.
awesome.
Yeah,
It is. It's a lot.
and it's interesting that you've almost sort of gone into looking at psychology somewhat. So as a psychology professor,
I should have taken your classes. See? I still miss some opportunities at Fredonia. I should have been in some of your classes too.
There's so many, it's hard to catch them all.
That's right.
That's right.
You're right.
Oh.
Awesome. So originally I was gonna ask you if you felt that Fredonia prepared you for your future, but you kind of already
I
answered
think
that
so.
one.
Clearly it
yes.
did.
Oh, yes.
So
Yeah.
so I'll move to our next question, and that's what advice would you offer students who are currently attending Fredonia?
There's so much. There's so much. But I do have to say, to kind of encompass what I've already said, ask questions. Don't go with the status quo. The minute you start thinking you can't ask questions, there's a problem. Start thinking for yourself. I remember there was a graduation speech by Steve Jobs, and I want to say that it was at Stanford. And he talked about life being too short to live somebody else's life and to not find yourself falling victim to living the way other people believe you should live. And that resonated with me because life is far too short for that. As I'm older now, I also think of something that I heard Jodie Foster say just recently. I refuse to compare myself with my younger self. I think that change in and of itself, I have to say it this way because I was in PR. I think that change needs a PR person because so many people think about change and they think about it maybe with fear, or they think about changing their rituals or their routines with fear. There are changes in life. It's the one thing that you can guarantee change will happen. And people so often approach change with fear as opposed to embracing change. And I think that wherever you are as a student, if you're just entering college, if you're just leaving college, if you're entering the workforce, try to embrace that change. Try to live your life for you. Don't compare yourself to your younger self and embrace change. Look at it as a new adventure. If you start fearing change at an early age, it will just become a fear that is now self-imposed, and all of a sudden it's what we call a self-fulfilled prophecy, right, Professor?
That's right.
It's all of a sudden you start saying, well, I hate change. And I caught one of my nieces doing this the other day too. When her sister just got married, my eldest niece got married last weekend, and my niece is saying, oh, now the change, and now she has a husband. And I tried to tell her, Tricia, think about it as a new adventure because now you have another brother. You have a brother-in-law. Now you're going to get to know your sister in a whole different way as a wife. Let's not fear that change. Embrace it. Think of it as a new adventure.
Yeah.
I like
I
that.
think that's a great
Yeah.
philosophy. Right.
Be change's PR person. How about that?
I think you have another career in the offing here. I think you need to write a book.
I've been told that. I think maybe I should consider it. I have an advisor in you, Dr. Croxton. You can
There
help
we
me with
go.
that.
I'll write the preface.
Okay, deal.
There you go.
Deal. And I feel like I want Chloe in there somewhere
Oh,
because
thank you.
she's incredible. So I need to work her in there as part of this team.
That's right. You'll be in charge of all the technical aspects of
yeah,
it, Chloe.
Sure. I can do that.
Okay. That pretty much does it for our interview today. Gina, is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Oh, I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come in and express my love for Fredonia. I have a brick out there by what we call the Campus Center, and it refers to Fredonia as home. And even just pulling in today, I start getting a little teary-eyed. Like, I loved it here so much. To the students who are here, you're so fortunate, and you may not even realize it. For 40 years, how fortunate you were to be a student here and to be accepted here. The culture is unlike anywhere else.
Right. Yeah, I have one of those bricks out there too. My kids, when I graduated, got a brick for me to put out there.
Yeah.
And it says yucca bean and yucca stew. I don't know
Oh.
quite what that means, but for
Oh.
some reason I would say
I
that
was-
to them. And so they put it on that brick.
Aw.
And that's what's sitting out
perfect.
there.
That's a
That's
tribute. That's a tribute.
Right. Oh, well, Gina, thank you so much for appearing on our podcast today. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
So I am Dr. Jack Croxton.
And I'm Chloe Kowalik, and we'll see you in the next podcast.
Sing its glory and its praises. Let them ring forever true. Beloved is our alma mater, Fredonia State